The crystal chandelier sparkled overhead as Diane Patterson stood alone near the bar, watching her husband Trevor laugh with his colleagues across the ballroom. She smoothed down her elegant navy dress, the one she'd spent 3 hours choosing that morning, and tried to ignore the knot forming in her stomach. This was supposed to be a celebration. Trevor had been at Patterson Enterprises for 5 years now, and tonight's holiday party was meant to honor the company's success. Success that she had built from nothing. But nobody here knew that. Diane sipped her champagne and watched Trevor's boss, Richard Chambers, hold court near the ice sculpture. Richard was everything Diane had learned to tolerate in business. Loud, self-important, and utterly convinced of his own brilliance. She had hired him 2 years ago because his resume was impressive and the board thought the company needed a strong male presence at the executive level. She had swallowed her frustration and signed off on it, operating through her network of trusted advisors who knew her true identity. Now she was regretting that decision. "Trevor, my man." Richard's voice boomed across the room. "Get over here. I want you to meet someone." Diane watched Trevor excuse himself and join Richard's circle. She considered walking over too, but something held her back. Maybe it was the way Richard's eyes had glazed over her when they'd arrived earlier, dismissing her with barely a nod. Maybe it was the tight smile Trevor had given her, the one that said, "Just let me handle the work stuff tonight." Diane Patterson? A warm voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see Beverly Harris, her best friend since college and the company's CFO. Beverly was one of only 3 people who knew the truth about Diane's ownership. Beverly's dark eyes sparkled with mischief, and her natural hair was styled in elegant twists that framed her face beautifully. "Girl, what are you doing hiding over here?" Beverly asked, linking her arm through Diane's. "Just observing," Diane said quietly. "It's strange being here as Trevor's wife instead of the woman who signs everyone's paychecks." Beverly finished. "I don't know how you do it. If Richard knew who you really were. He doesn't. And Trevor wants to keep it that way." The words tasted bitter. "He thinks it's better for his career if people don't know he's married to the boss." Beverly's expression softened. "How are you feeling about that?" Before Diane could answer, raised voices cut through the elegant party chatter. Both women turned toward the commotion. Richard Chambers stood at the center of a growing crowd, his face flushed red with alcohol and self-righteousness. Trevor stood beside him, looking uncomfortable. "I'm just saying," Richard announced loudly, "that a man needs to be the provider in his household. It's biology. It's tradition. It's the natural order." Several people laughed nervously. Diane felt her chest tighten. "Some of these modern women," Richard continued, his words slurring slightly, "they forget their place. They want to compete with their husbands instead of supporting them." His eyes scanned the room and landed directly on Diane. "Like Trevor here. Great guy, solid employee, but I heard his wife doesn't even work. Just sits at home spending his money." The room went silent. Diane felt every eye turned toward her. Her face grew hot, but she kept her expression neutral, her mother's voice echoing in her mind, "Never let them see you break, baby girl. Never." Trevor's face had gone pale. "Richard, that's not. I'm just calling it like I see it, buddy." Richard clapped Trevor on the shoulder hard enough to make him stumble slightly. "You're doing the right thing, keeping your woman at home where she belongs. These career women, they're all the same. Ungrateful. Entitled. They don't understand what it means to let a man be a man." Beverly's hand tightened on Diane's arm. "Let me go over there and—" "No." Diane's voice was steady, but inside, something was crumbling. "Not here. Not now." "But Diane." "I said no." Diane pulled her arm free and set her champagne glass down carefully on the bar. Her hands were shaking, but her voice remained calm. "Excuse me. I need some air." She walked toward the bathroom with measured steps, her head high, even as tears blurred her vision. Behind her, she heard Richard's laughter resume, heard him launch into another story. She heard Trevor's silence, which somehow hurt more than Richard's words. In the ladies' room, Diane locked herself in a stall and finally let the tears fall. She pressed her hands against the cool metal door and tried to breathe. She had built this company from nothing. 15 years ago, she'd been a junior analyst with a dream and a small inheritance from her grandmother. She'd worked 18-hour days, made impossible decisions, and sacrificed everything to create something meaningful. Patterson Enterprises now employed over 500 people and generated millions in annual revenue. And Richard Chambers, the man she'd hired to help run it, had just called her an ungrateful, entitled woman who sat at home spending her husband's money. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. Diane heard the bathroom door open and Beverly's voice called softly, "Diane? Honey, are you okay?" "I'm fine." Diane wiped her eyes and stepped out of the stall. Her reflection in the mirror showed smeared mascara and hurt in her eyes that she couldn't quite hide. Beverly handed her a tissue. "That man is trash and you know it. Say the word, and I'll have Christine and HR start termination paperwork first thing Monday morning." "No." Diane dabbed at her eyes. "Not like that. Not yet." "Then how?" Beverly's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't let him treat you like this. You can't let anyone treat you like this." Diane looked at her reflection and saw not just her own pain, but the pain of every black woman who'd been dismissed, underestimated, and disrespected in spaces they'd built with their own hands. She thought about her mother, who'd taught her to be strong but also to be strategic. She thought about her grandmother, whose legacy had made all of this possible. And she thought about Trevor, standing silent while his boss humiliated his wife. "I need to go home," Diane said finally. "Can you call me a car?" "What about Trevor?" "He can find his own way home." Diane straightened her shoulders and fixed her makeup. "He made his choice tonight. Now I need to make mine." As she left the bathroom, she saw Trevor searching for her near the coat check. His expression was anguished, guilty. But Diane walked past him without a word, collected her coat, and stepped out into the cold December night. The city lights blurred through her tears as the car pulled away from the building that bore her family name, the company that she had poured her soul into creating. Richard Chambers thought he knew everything. He thought he understood power and success and what it meant to be a boss. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. He had humiliated the wrong woman on the wrong night, and Diane Patterson was done being invisible in her own company. The game had changed. Richard just didn't know it yet. Diane heard Trevor's key in the lock around midnight. She sat in the dark living room of their downtown condo, still wearing her navy dress, a cup of cold tea beside her. She'd been sitting there for 2 hours, thinking and planning and feeling the weight of Richard's words press against her chest like a stone. The door opened and Trevor stepped inside. He turned on the light and froze when he saw her sitting there. "Diane." His voice was soft, careful. "You left without saying anything. You stood there without saying anything." Diane's voice was calm, but Trevor flinched like she'd shouted. That seemed like a fair trade. Trevor closed the door and moved toward her slowly, like she was a wounded animal that might bolt. Maybe she was. "Baby, I'm sorry. Richard was drunk and talking nonsense, and I should have shut him down immediately. But you didn't." "I know." Trevor sat on the ottoman facing her, his elbows on his knees. He still wore his work suit, the charcoal one she'd helped him pick out last month. He looked tired and miserable and guilty, but Diane couldn't bring herself to comfort him. "I froze. I was shocked and I didn't know what to say, and by the time I found my voice, you were already gone." "You didn't know what to say?" Diane repeated slowly. "Your boss called your wife ungrateful and entitled. He said I sit at home spending your money. He humiliated me in front of your entire company, and you didn't know what to say. I know how it sounds. Do you?" Diane leaned forward. "Do you know how it feels to build something from nothing and watch someone else take credit? To work harder than anyone else and be invisible? To be dismissed as a man's accessory when you're the reason he has anything to stand on?" Trevor's expression shifted, confusion mixing with his guilt. "What are you talking about?" Diane stood abruptly and walked to the window. The city sprawled below them, millions of lights in the darkness. "I'm talking about respect, Trevor. I'm talking about partnership. I'm talking about the fact that my own husband wouldn't defend me because he was afraid of what his boss might think. That's not fair." Trevor stood too, his voice rising. "You know how hard I've worked at Patterson Enterprises. I'm up for senior director next quarter. If I caused a scene with Richard. So your promotion is more important than my dignity? That's not what I'm saying." Trevor ran his hands over his face. "Diane, you know I love you. You know I appreciate everything you do. But tonight wasn't the time or place to what? To stand up for your wife? To be a man?" Diane turned to face him and she saw him flinch at her words. "That's what Richard said, isn't it? That you were doing the right thing, keeping your woman at home where she belongs. That you were letting yourself be a man." Trevor's jaw tightened. He was drunk and running his mouth. Nobody took him seriously. Everyone took him seriously. They laughed. They agreed. Diane's voice cracked slightly. "And you stood there and let them. What did you want me to do?" Trevor's frustration was showing now. "Create a scene? Get myself fired? We have a mortgage, Diane. We have bills. You might not worry about money, but I have responsibilities. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and cutting. Diane stared at her husband, seeing something in his expression she'd been trying to ignore for months. It wasn't just about tonight. It wasn't just about Richard's cruelty. It was about something deeper, something that had been growing between them like a cancer. What do you mean, I don't worry about money? Diane asked quietly. Trevor looked away. Nothing. I didn't mean anything. Yes, you did. Say it. Fine. Trevor's voice rose again. You inherited money from your grandmother. You've never had to struggle the way I have. You've never had to prove yourself or worry about layoffs or wonder if you're good enough. Everything just came easy for you. Diane felt the room tilt slightly. Easy? Easier than most people, Trevor amended, but the damage was done. You get to stay home and do whatever you want while I'm out there grinding every day, dealing with people like Richard, trying to build a career and provide for us. So forgive me if I didn't risk everything I've built just to defend your honor in front of my boss. The silence that followed was deafening. Diane walked back to the couch and sat down slowly. She felt hollowed out, like something vital had been scooped from her chest. Trevor thought she had it easy. Trevor thought she sat at home doing nothing. Trevor had stood silent while his boss degraded her because deep down, some part of him agreed. I see, Diane said finally. Baby, I didn't mean it like that. Please go to bed, Trevor. Diane? I need you to leave me alone right now. Diane's voice was steady, but Trevor could hear the tears in it. Please. Trevor hesitated, his hand reaching toward her, but then he dropped it and nodded. Okay. We'll talk in the morning when we're both calmer. Diane listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall, listened to the bedroom door close softly. Then she pulled out her phone and texted Beverly, We need to talk. Tomorrow morning. My office. The reply came immediately, I'll be there at 8. You okay? Diane didn't answer that question. Instead, she typed, Call Christine in HR. Tell her to pull Richard Chambers's contract and employment file. Everything. And tell David Brennan I need an emergency board meeting scheduled for next Friday. 3 dots appeared then, Oh shit. You're doing it? I'm done being invisible, Diane typed. It's time everyone knew exactly who owns Patterson Enterprises. She set the phone down and looked around the home she'd built with Trevor. They'd been married for 8 years, together for 10. She loved him deeply, truly, but tonight had revealed a crack in their foundation that she couldn't ignore. Trevor didn't see her as an equal. He saw her as someone who'd had it easy, someone who didn't understand struggle, someone whose honor wasn't worth defending. He had no idea that every dollar he'd earned at Patterson Enterprises had come from her vision, her risk, her endless nights of work. He had no idea that she'd stayed invisible not because she was weak, but because she'd thought it would protect their marriage from ego and competition. He had no idea that his comfortable salary, his impressive title, his promising career, all of it existed because she'd built it. And Richard Chambers, who'd called her ungrateful and entitled, who'd dismissed her as nothing more than a man's dependent. He had no idea he was about to lose everything. Diane stood and walked to the window again. In the reflection, she saw her mother's face, heard her voice. Baby girl, sometimes you have to let people underestimate you. But only until you're ready to show them who you really are. She was ready now. The tears had stopped. The hurt was still there, heavy in her chest, but beneath it, something stronger was rising. Not anger exactly, though there was plenty of that. Not revenge, though she couldn't deny the satisfaction of what was coming. It was something simpler and more powerful, dignity. She was Diane Patterson. She had built an empire. And she was done apologizing for it. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray. Diane woke early after a restless night on the couch and found Trevor already in the kitchen making coffee. He looked like he hadn't slept much either, his eyes puffy and his movements careful, like he was afraid of setting off a bomb. Good morning, he said quietly, pouring her a cup without asking. He knew how she liked it, 2 sugars, splash of cream. 8 years of marriage had taught him that much, at least. Morning. Diane accepted the cup but didn't sit down at the breakfast bar where she usually perched while they talked about their day. Instead, she stood by the window looking out at the city waking up. I've been thinking all night, Trevor began. About what I said. About what I didn't say. And I want you to know. I need to tell you something. Diane cut him off gently. She turned to face him, and whatever he saw in her expression made him set his own coffee down carefully. Okay. I'm going into the office this morning. I have a meeting. Trevor frowned. On a Saturday? With who? With my CFO and my HR director. Diane watched his confusion deepen. I need to discuss personnel issues at my company. Your company? Trevor's voice was cautious, like he wasn't sure if this was a metaphor he was missing. Baby, you don't work. You haven't worked since. Since when? Diane asked. Since we got married? Since you started at Patterson Enterprises? She set her coffee down and crossed her arms. When exactly do you think I stopped working, Trevor? I don't understand what you're asking me. I know you don't. That's the problem. Diane took a deep breath. Patterson Enterprises. The company where you work, where you've built your career, where Richard Chambers runs his mouth and humiliates people at holiday parties. Do you know who owns it? Some investment group, I think? Or maybe a family trust. Trevor shrugged. I've never really thought about it. Why? Because I own it, Trevor. I am Patterson Enterprises. The words fell between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread wider and wider. Trevor stared at her, his mouth slightly open, not comprehending. What? Patterson Enterprises was my grandmother's maiden name. I started the company 15 years ago before we met, using the inheritance she left me. I built it from nothing while working another job to keep the lights on. I grew it carefully, strategically, until it became what it is today. Diane's voice was steady, factual. Richard Chambers doesn't own it. The board doesn't own it. I do. Sole ownership, through a trust that bears my maiden name to keep things private. Trevor shook his head slowly. No, that's not. You're home all day. You don't go to an office. You don't talk about work. I work from home. I have since we got married because you told me you wanted me to have flexibility, to be here when you needed me. Diane felt her throat tighten. I take calls in my home office while you're at work. I attend virtual board meetings. I review financials and approve major decisions. I do all of this quietly because you told me you wanted to build your career on your own merit, without people thinking you were riding your wife's coattails. This is crazy. Trevor's voice rose. Why wouldn't you tell me this? Why would you let me work at your company without saying anything? Because you asked me to stay out of your career. Diane's control cracked slightly. When we first started dating, you told me you wanted to be your own man. You said you were tired of people assuming things about you. So when you applied to Patterson and got hired, on your own merit, by the way, the hiring committee didn't know you were my boyfriend, I thought maybe this could work. I could support your ambition without overshadowing it. Support my... Trevor's face was reddening. You've been lying to me for 8 years? I haven't lied. I just didn't correct your assumptions. That's the same thing. Trevor slammed his hand on the counter, making the coffee cups rattle. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I've been working for my wife this whole time and everyone knew but me. Nobody knows but Beverly, Christine, and David Brennan from the board. I made sure of it specifically so you wouldn't feel humiliated. Diane's voice hardened. But apparently, I'm the one who should feel humiliated. I'm the ungrateful woman who sits at home spending your money, remember? Trevor's face went pale. Oh God. Last night. Richard said, and you didn't say anything because you wanted to keep it secret. Because you were afraid of what people would think. Because your ego was more important than the truth. Diane felt tears threatening again and fought them back. But I'm done protecting your ego, Trevor. I'm done being invisible in my own company so you can feel like the provider. This isn't fair. Trevor's voice had dropped to almost a whisper. You should have told me from the beginning. Before we got married. Before I accepted the job. You should have been honest. I was trying to love you the way you needed to be loved. I was trying to give you space to be who you wanted to be. Diane's voice cracked. But Friday night showed me the truth. When your boss degraded me, when he called me names and dismissed me as nothing, you stood there silent because some part of you believed him. Some part of you thinks I'm less than you because I'm not out there grinding the way you are. That's not true. Then why didn't you defend me? Diane's question hung in the air. Why didn't you tell Richard to shut his mouth? Why didn't you walk out with me? Why did you put your career above your wife? Trevor opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked lost, angry, betrayed, and guilty all at once. I don't know how to process this. Any of this. Then take your time. Process it. Diane picked up her purse from the side table. I'm going to my office to plan how to handle Richard Chambers. He's been running that company into the ground with his ego and his outdated ideas, and Friday night was the last straw. I'm taking back control publicly, and I'm doing it next Friday at the board meeting. Wait. Trevor moved toward her. What does that mean? Are you firing him? Yes. And me? Trevor's voice was small. Are you firing me too? Diane looked at her husband, at the man she'd loved for a decade, and felt her heart break a little more. I would never fire you for being my husband, Trevor. Your job is yours because you've earned it. But after everything that's happened, I don't know what our marriage looks like anymore. I don't know if you can handle being married to a woman who has more power than you. I don't know if your ego can survive it. Diane, please? I need space. I'm going to stay at my mother's for a few days while you think about what you really want. Do you want a partner or do you want someone to provide for? Do you want an equal or do you want to feel superior? Because I can't be both. Diane walked to the door, her hand on the knob, and turned back one more time. Trevor stood in the kitchen looking broken, and despite everything, she still loved him. But love wasn't enough. Not anymore. For what it's worth, she said softly, I never wanted you to feel small. I wanted you to feel secure enough that my success wouldn't threaten you. But I can't keep shrinking myself to make you comfortable. I won't. She left before he could respond, closing the door quietly behind her. As she walked to her car, her phone buzzed with a text from Beverly. Office is open. Coffee is hot. Let's burn this thing down. Diane smiled despite the tears on her cheeks. She had work to do. Diane's mother, Janet Reed, lived in a small house in the suburbs, the same house where Diane had grown up. It was a modest 3-bedroom with a garden Janet tended religiously and a front porch where they'd spent countless evenings talking about life, dreams, and disappointments. Diane pulled into the driveway late Saturday afternoon, exhausted from her meeting with Beverly and Christine. They'd reviewed Richard's file and found enough inappropriate conduct to justify immediate termination, but Diane wanted to do this the right way. She wanted the board meeting. She wanted witnesses. She wanted everyone to understand exactly what Richard Chambers had done and exactly who had the power to end his career. Her mother met her at the door, took one look at Diane's face, and pulled her into a hug without asking a single question. That was Janet's way. Comfort first, explanations later. Come on in, baby girl. I just made tea. Inside, the house smelled like lemon cookies and lavender, the sense of Diane's childhood. Janet had taught high school English for 35 years before retiring, and her home still reflected her love of books and learning. Shelves lined every wall, packed with everything from Toni Morrison to Ta-Nehisi Coates to well-worn teaching manuals. They settled in the kitchen, Janet pouring tea into her good china cups, the ones reserved for serious conversations. Diane wrapped her hands around the warm porcelain and felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Trevor called me, Janet said without preamble. About an hour ago. Diane looked up sharply. What did he say? That you'd left. That you'd told him about the company. That he didn't know what to do. Janet sipped her tea calmly. I told him he should start by thinking about why his wife felt she couldn't tell him the truth about her own success. Despite everything, Diane smiled. I bet he loved that. He did not. Janet's expression was serene. But he needed to hear it. Now tell me what happened. All of it. Diane did. She started with Friday night's party and Richard's humiliation, moved through Trevor's silence and their fight, and ended with this morning's revelation. Janet listened without interrupting, her dark eyes sharp and thoughtful behind her reading glasses. When Diane finished, Janet set down her teacup with a decisive click. That man humiliated you in public and your husband let him. Yes. And then your husband suggested that you don't work as hard as he does, that you've had things easy. Yes. And he's angry with you for not telling him you own the company, even though he specifically asked you to stay out of his career. Yes. Janet shook her head. Baby girl, I love Trevor. You know I do. He's a good man with a good heart. But good men can still have fragile egos, and fragile egos can make them do hurtful things. I know. Diane felt tears threatening again. Mama, I don't know what to do. I love him, but I can't keep hiding who I am. I can't keep being less so he can feel like more. No, you can't. Janet reached across the table and took Diane's hand. Your grandmother gave you that money for a reason. She wanted you to have opportunities she never had. She wanted you to build something that couldn't be taken away. And you did that, Diane. You built an empire. You should be proud. Trevor makes me feel like I should be ashamed. Trevor makes you feel that way, or you feel that way because you're scared of what he thinks? Janet's question was gentle but pointed. There's a difference, baby. Diane considered this. Maybe both. Probably both. Janet squeezed her hand. You know what your grandmother used to tell me? She said, Janet, the world is going to try to make black women small. It's going to tell us we're too loud, too ambitious, too much. Our job is to take up space anyway. Our job is to be too much and not apologize for it. She was right. She was always right. Janet smiled, but it faded quickly. Diane, I need you to hear something important. What Richard Chambers did to you Friday night was wrong. Cruel. Unacceptable. And you have every right to make him face consequences. But I want you to think carefully about why you're doing what you're doing. What do you mean? Are you revealing your ownership and firing Richard because it's the right business decision? Or are you doing it to punish Trevor for not defending you? Diane started to protest, but Janet held up her hand. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm saying you need to be clear about your motivations. Because if you're lashing out at Trevor through Richard, that's not going to solve your marriage problems. That's just going to create more resentment. Richard deserves to be fired, Diane said firmly. His conduct has been inappropriate for months. He's made several female employees uncomfortable. He's ignored HR complaints. He's created a toxic culture that's driving away talent. Friday night was just the final straw. Okay. Then fire him for those reasons. Make it about his behavior, not about your hurt feelings. Janet's voice was firm but loving. Be the boss you need to be, not the wounded wife getting revenge. Diane knew her mother was right. She'd known it all day really, but hearing it spoken aloud made it concrete. I hate that you're always right. It's what you pay me for. Janet stood and started pulling ingredients from her refrigerator. Now you're going to stay for dinner. I'm making your favorite and we're going to talk about what you really want from your marriage. Not what you think you should want. What you actually want. As her mother moved around the kitchen with familiar efficiency, Diane felt some of the heaviness in her chest ease. She wasn't alone in this. She had her mother's wisdom, Beverly's support, and her own strength to draw on. Her phone buzzed. A text from Trevor. Can we talk? Please? Diane showed the message to her mother. What's your gut telling you? Janet asked. That I'm not ready yet. That I need to figure out my own head first before I can deal with his feelings. Then that's your answer. Janet cracked eggs into a bowl. You don't owe him a conversation before you're ready to have it. You don't owe anyone access to you when you're hurting. Diane typed back, I need more time. I'll reach out when I'm ready. The response came quickly, I understand. I love you. She didn't respond to that. She wasn't ready to say it back yet and she refused to fake it. Mama? Diane asked after a while. Do you think Trevor and I can fix this? Janet was quiet for a moment, whisking eggs with steady hands. I think you can if you both want to. But he's going to have to do some real work on himself. He's going to have to confront why he needs to feel like the provider, why your success threatens him. And you're going to have to decide if you can trust him again after he let someone disrespect you. That's not exactly encouraging. I'm not here to encourage you. I'm here to tell you the truth. Janet pointed the whisk at her daughter. You deserve a partner who celebrates your success, not one who's intimidated by it. You deserve someone who stands up for you, not someone who's worried about looking good in front of his boss. If Trevor can become that person, wonderful. If he can't, you need to be prepared to move forward without him. The words stung, but they also felt liberating. Diane had spent so much time trying to make her marriage work, trying to balance Trevor's ego with her own ambitions. Maybe it was time to stop balancing and start demanding. Next Friday is going to change everything, Diane said quietly. I know, baby. Janet slid the omelet onto a plate and set it in front of her daughter. But sometimes everything needs to change. Sometimes the old way of doing things isn't working anymore, and you have to burn it down to build something better. Diane picked up her fork and looked at the woman who'd raised her to be strong, smart, and unapologetic. Will you come to the board meeting? I want you there. Janet's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. Baby girl, I wouldn't miss it for the world. They ate together as the sun set outside, and Diane felt something shift inside her. The hurt was still there. The anger was still there. But beneath it all, there was clarity. She knew what she needed to do, and she knew she had the strength to do it. Richard Chambers had made a grave mistake. He'd underestimated her. And next Friday, in front of the entire board, he was going to learn exactly what that mistake would cost him. The days between Saturday and Friday crawled by like wounded animals. Diane stayed at her mother's house, working from the guest bedroom that had been hers as a teenager. Beverly came by Monday evening with files and coffee, and they spent 3 hours preparing for the board meeting. Christine found 4 formal complaints against Richard that were never properly investigated, Beverly said, spreading documents across the kitchen table. 3 from female employees about inappropriate comments, 1 from a junior analyst about Richard taking credit for his work. Why wasn't I told about these? Diane demanded. Because Richard is technically in charge of HR oversight as acting CEO. He told Christine to handle them quietly, to avoid damaging company morale. Beverly's expression was grim. She documented everything, thank God, but she was worried about her job if she pushed back too hard. Diane felt anger burning in her chest. This was exactly why she'd stayed invisible for too long. While she'd been trying to protect Trevor's ego, Richard had been building a toxic culture that hurt vulnerable employees. What else? Financial irregularities. Nothing illegal but questionable. He approved several large expense accounts for himself without board approval. First-class flights to conferences that had virtual options. A company car that's well above the limit for his position. Beverly pulled out another folder. David Brennan noticed it during the last quarterly review but didn't push because Richard claimed you'd approved it. I never approved any of that. I know. But Richard was counting on nobody checking with you directly. Beverly sat back. Diane, this man has been running your company like his personal kingdom. Friday night wasn't an aberration. It was just the first time you saw his true colors in person. Diane's phone buzzed. Another text from Trevor, please talk to me. I'm sorry. I miss you. She'd received similar messages every day. Each one made her heart ache, but she wasn't ready yet. She needed to stay focused on what was coming. Have you talked to him at all? Beverly asked gently, noticing the phone. No. I told him I needed space. How are you feeling about everything? Diane set the phone face down on the table. Confused. Angry. Sad. I love him, Beverly. I really do. But I keep thinking about him standing there while Richard humiliated me and I don't know if I can forgive that. You don't have to decide today. Beverly reached across the table and squeezed her hand. One crisis at a time. First we handle Richard. Then you figure out your marriage. On Tuesday, Diane met with David Brennan at a quiet cafe downtown. David was a sharp, silver-haired attorney who'd been on Patterson Enterprises' board since the beginning. He was one of the few people who knew her identity, and his loyalty had never wavered. I've reviewed everything you sent me, David said, sliding a folder across the table. This is more than enough to terminate Richard for cause. No severance, no recommendations, no soft landing. He violated company policy, ignored HR complaints, and created a hostile work environment. The liability alone justifies immediate termination. Good. Diane sipped her tea. What about the optics of me revealing my ownership at the same time? Honestly, it's brilliant. David leaned back in his chair. You're not just firing an employee. You're sending a message about company values and leadership. The fact that you've been operating quietly for years actually works in your favor. It shows you're not interested in ego or attention, just results. Some people will say I'm being vindictive. Let them. David's smile was fierce. You're a black woman running a major enterprise. People are going to criticize you no matter what you do. You might as well do what's right and ignore the noise. On Wednesday, Christine Okafor came to Janet's house with the official termination paperwork. Christine was a tall, elegant woman with kind eyes and an iron spine. She'd been fighting Richard's toxicity from inside HR for months, and the relief on her face was palpable. I'm so glad you're finally doing this, Christine said. I've been documenting everything, but I was afraid to escalate without board support. Richard has a way of making people feel like they're the problem if they complain about him. You did the right thing by keeping records. Diane reviewed the termination documents carefully. After Friday, I want you to conduct a full culture audit. Interview employees anonymously. Find out how deep this problem goes. And Christine, if anyone retaliated against you for helping with this, I want to know immediately. Thank you. Christine's voice was thick with emotion. Thank you for seeing what was happening and caring enough to fix it. After Christine left, Diane sat with her mother on the front porch. The evening was cold but clear, stars visible above the suburban houses. You're doing the right thing, Janet said quietly. I know, but I'm scared. Of what? Of everything changing. Of people judging me. Of losing Trevor. Diane pulled her sweater tighter. Of being alone. Baby girl, you're not alone. You've got me, you've got Beverly, you've got good people who believe in you. Janet rocked gently in her chair. And as for Trevor, he's been blowing up my phone too. What's he saying? That he loves you. That he's sorry. That he understands why you hid the truth but wishes you hadn't. Janet paused. That he's been an idiot with a fragile ego and he's trying to do better. Despite everything, Diane felt hope flutter in her chest. He said that. He did. Whether he means it or can actually change, that's another question. Janet looked at her daughter. But he's trying. That counts for something. On Thursday night, Diane finally responded to Trevor's texts. I'm coming home Friday after the board meeting. We need to talk. Really talk. His response was immediate. I'll be there. I love you. Diane stared at those 3 words for a long time. She still loved him too. But love and respect weren't the same thing, and she needed both to make this marriage work. Friday morning arrived bright and cold. Diane dressed carefully in a burgundy power suit and her grandmother's pearl earrings. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman who'd built an empire, a woman who'd been knocked down and gotten back up, a woman who was about to reclaim her space. You ready? Janet asked from the doorway. No. But I'm doing it anyway. They drove downtown together, Janet humming quietly beside her. Beverly was waiting in the parking garage, looking fierce in navy blue. Together, the 3 women walked into Patterson Enterprises through the front doors. The security guard looked up and smiled. Morning, Mrs. Patterson. Haven't seen you here in a while. Morning, James. It's good to be back. Diane smiled at him and his eyes widened slightly. He'd probably never seen her in business mode before. Is the conference room ready for the board meeting? Yes, ma'am. Should be all set up. In the elevator, Beverly laughed quietly. Did you see his face? He had no idea who you were. Nobody does, Diane said. But they will in about 30 minutes. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor, and Diane stepped into the world she'd built. Her world. And she was about to remind everyone exactly who was in charge. The conference room on the executive floor was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, a massive mahogany table dominated the center, and leather chairs lined its perimeter. Diane had chosen every detail when the company moved to this building 3 years ago, though she'd done it through Beverly to maintain her anonymity. Now, standing at the head of that table with her mother beside her, she felt the weight of what she was about to do settle on her shoulders. David Brennan arrived first, giving Diane a reassuring nod. Then came the other board members, 3 external advisors Diane trusted completely. They'd all been briefed on what was coming, though they didn't know the personal context behind it. Christine Okafor slipped in quietly and took a seat near the back with her tablet, ready to document everything. Beverly stood near the door, arms crossed, looking like a guardian angel ready for war. At exactly 9 a.m., Richard Chambers strode in with his usual confidence. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself like he owned the building. When he saw Diane standing at the head of the table, his expression flickered with confusion, then dismissal. I think you're in the wrong meeting, Mrs. Patterson, he said with barely concealed condescension. This is a board meeting. Wives aren't invited. Sit down, Richard. David Brennan's voice was cold. Richard's confusion deepened, but he sat, his eyes darting around the table trying to understand the dynamics. What's going on here? We're about to discuss your employment status, Diane said calmly. But first I need to clarify something. You called me Mrs. Patterson. That's my married name. My maiden name and the name under which I conduct business is Patterson. Diane Patterson. Sole owner of Patterson Enterprises. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard stared at her, his face going through a remarkable series of expressions. Confusion, disbelief, dawning horror. That's not possible, he said finally. The company is owned by a trust. By me. The Patterson Family Trust, which I control completely. Diane placed a document on the table. Here's the registration paperwork. Here's the trust documentation. Here's my signature on every major company decision for the past 15 years. Richard's face had gone pale. But you're Trevor's wife. You don't work. You said you didn't work. I never said that. You assumed it. Diane's voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. Much like you assumed I was an ungrateful, entitled woman who sits at home spending her husband's money. Those were your words last Friday at the holiday party, weren't they? I was drinking. You were drunk, yes. But drunk words are sober thoughts, Richard. Diane pulled out another folder. And Friday night wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern of behavior that's been documented extensively by our HR department. Christine stood and approached the table, handing out packets to each board member. These are formal complaints filed against Mr. Chambers by 4 different employees over the past 18 months. Complaints about inappropriate comments regarding gender, race, and personal relationships. Complaints about hostile work environment. Complaints about credit theft and intimidation tactics. Richard's eyes widened as he looked at the documents. Those were minor issues. Misunderstandings. I handled them appropriately. You buried them, Diane corrected. You used your position to silence complaints against yourself. You told Christine to handle them quietly, to avoid damaging company morale. What you really meant was to avoid damaging your reputation. This is ridiculous. Richard stood abruptly. I've done nothing but improve this company's bottom line. I've brought in new contracts, expanded our market share. You've done adequate work while creating a toxic culture, David Brennan interrupted. And you've engaged in financial improprieties that, while not illegal, violate company policy. Beverly stepped forward with another folder. Unauthorized expense accounts totaling over $75,000 in the past year. First-class international flights when virtual meetings were available. A company car that exceeds the limit for your position. Expense account dinners that look more like personal entertainment than business development. Richard's face had gone from pale to red. I was told those were approved. I had verbal approval from whom? Diane asked quietly. From me? Because I never approved any of it. You used my anonymity to do whatever you wanted, assuming no one would check with me directly. This is a setup. Richard's voice rose. You're manufacturing reasons to fire me because you're upset about a few stupid comments I made at a party. This is personal vendetta, not business. You're right that it's personal, Diane agreed. It's personal to every woman in this company who's had to endure your condescension. It's personal to every employee who's filed a complaint and been ignored. It's personal to every junior staff member whose ideas you've stolen. And yes, Richard, it's personal to me, because you humiliated me in front of my husband and his colleagues while I stood in a building that I own. Janet spoke for the first time, her retired teacher voice cutting through Richard's bluster like a knife. Young man, you made a critical error. You assumed that because a woman was quiet, she was powerless. You assumed that because she chose to stay in the background, she had nothing to offer. You assumed that marriage made her lesser. And now you're learning what happens when you underestimate a black woman who's built an empire. Who the hell are you? Richard demanded. I'm her mother, Janet said calmly. And I taught my daughter to document everything, trust her instincts, and never let a mediocre man take credit for her work. You should have done your research before you opened your mouth, Richard. The board members, who'd been silently reviewing the documents, began speaking up one by one. These complaints are serious, said Margaret Torres, a retired executive who specialized in corporate culture. If even half of this is accurate, we have a liability issue. The financial irregularities are concerning, added James Whitfield, the board's finance specialist. Not large enough to trigger an audit, but certainly indicative of poor judgment. I move to terminate Mr. Chambers's employment for cause, effective immediately, David Brennan said formally. No severance package, no recommendations, no transition period. He's to clean out his office today under supervision and turn over all company property. I second that motion, Margaret said immediately. All in favor? David looked around the table. Every hand went up, including Diane's. The motion passes unanimously. David made a note on his tablet. Christine, please prepare the termination paperwork. Richard stood frozen, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. You can't do this. I'll sue. I'll go to the press. I'll tell everyone about your little deception. Be my guest, Diane said calmly. Tell them that you spent 2 years working for a black woman without realizing it because you were too arrogant to do basic research. Tell them you got fired for creating a hostile workplace and misusing company funds. Tell them you publicly humiliated your boss's wife at a party and lost your job because of it. I'm sure that will make you look very sympathetic. Richard's mouth opened and closed. He looked around the room desperately but found no allies. What about Trevor? He knew, didn't he? He must have known his wife owned the company. Trevor didn't know until last Saturday, Diane said. Because I chose not to tell him, to protect his career from exactly this kind of assumption. I wanted him to succeed on his own merits, without anyone thinking he was riding his wife's coattails. Clearly, that was the right decision, since you're assuming right now that his success must have something to do with me rather than his own abilities. This is insane, Richard muttered. No, this is consequences. Diane walked around the table and stood in front of Richard. She wasn't particularly tall, but in that moment she seemed to tower over him. You humiliated me, Richard. You dismissed me as nothing. You called me ungrateful and entitled. You said I didn't understand what it meant to let a man be a man. And all the while you were working for me, living off my success, benefiting from my vision. You were never the boss here, Richard. You were just an employee who forgot his place. Richard's face contorted with rage and humiliation. For a moment, Diane thought he might actually explode. But then his shoulders sagged and she saw defeat settle over him. "Christine will escort you to your office," David said. "You have 1 hour to collect personal belongings. Anything related to company business stays here." Richard looked at Diane one last time and she saw something ugly in his expression. Not just anger but genuine hatred. "You're going to regret this." "No," Diane said quietly. "You're going to regret underestimating me. There's a difference." Christine stepped forward. "Mr. Chambers, please come with me." After they left, the room remained silent for a long moment. Then Margaret Torres started clapping, slow and deliberate. The others joined in and Diane felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. "That was magnificent," Margaret said. "I've wanted to fire that pompous ass for 6 months, but we didn't have enough documentation. How long have you been planning this?" "About a week," Diane admitted. "Though the documentation has been building for 18 months, thanks to Christine." "What happens now?" James Whitfield asked. "Are you taking over as CEO officially?" Diane had thought about this all week. "No. I'm going to stay in my ownership role, but I want to hire a new CEO who actually embodies our company values. Someone who understands that leadership isn't about ego or intimidation. I'm thinking about promoting Beverly Harris to CEO and Christine Okafor to COO. They've been running things behind the scenes anyway." Beverly's head snapped up. "Diane?" "We'll discuss it properly later," Diane said, smiling at her friend. "But yes, I'm serious. You've earned it 1,000 times over." The meeting adjourned shortly after, board members shaking Diane's hand and promising their full support. David Brennan pulled her aside as they were leaving. "You handled that perfectly," he said. "Calm, professional, backed by documentation. Richard can threaten to sue all he wants, but he doesn't have a case." "Thank you for everything, David." "Are you going to address the employees?" he asked. "They're going to have questions." "Next week. I want to give everyone time to process Richard's departure first. Then I'll introduce myself properly." Diane smiled wryly. "It's going to be quite a shock for some people." After everyone left, it was just Diane, Beverly, and Janet in the conference room. Diane sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "I can't believe we just did that," she said. "Believe it, baby girl." Janet squeezed her shoulder. "You just took your power back." "And terrified half the executive floor," Beverly added, grinning. "Did you see Richard's face? I thought he was going to have a stroke." "He deserved it," Diane said. "But now comes the hard part." "Trevor?" Beverly guessed. "Trevor," Diane confirmed. "I told him I'd come home after the meeting. I have no idea what I'm going to say to him." "Tell him the truth," Janet advised. "About how you feel, what you need, what you're willing to accept. And listen to what he has to say. Really listen. Then you'll know what to do." Diane looked out the window at the city below, at the world she'd conquered and the life she was trying to save. Richard Chambers had been the easy part. Trevor Patterson was going to require something much harder than anger or documentation. He was going to require vulnerability, honesty, and the courage to risk her heart one more time. Diane stood outside her own front door for a full minute before using her key. The condo looked the same as when she'd left almost a week ago, but everything felt different now. She'd fired Richard Chambers. She'd claimed her power publicly. She'd become fully visible in her own company. Now she had to figure out if her marriage could survive the truth. Trevor appeared in the hallway before she'd even set down her purse. He looked terrible, exhausted, unshaven, his eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't been sleeping. He still wore his work clothes, though it was past 6 in the evening. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi." They stood in the entryway, neither moving closer, the space between them feeling like a canyon. Finally, Trevor spoke. "I heard what happened at the board meeting. Paul called me. He said Richard was escorted out by security, and the rumor is you fired him." "I did." "The rumor also says you own the entire company." "I do." Trevor nodded slowly, processing this. "So it's real. All of it. You're the owner. The boss. The one in charge of everything." "I've been trying to tell you that all week, Trevor." "I know. He ran his hands over his face. "I've been sitting here for days trying to wrap my head around it. My wife owns the company I work for. My wife has been my boss's boss's boss this entire time. My wife is rich and powerful and built an empire while I thought she was home watching Netflix. I've never watched Netflix in the middle of the day in my life," Diane said, a hint of irritation creeping into her voice. "I've been working. Just because you didn't see it doesn't mean it wasn't happening. I know that now. Trevor's voice cracked. Baby, I'm so sorry. For everything. For assuming, for not asking, for caring more about my ego than your dignity. Diane set her purse down carefully. Can we sit? This isn't a conversation to have standing in the hallway. They moved to the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch. Diane noticed Trevor had been sleeping there. A pillow and blanket were folded neatly on the ottoman. He saw her notice and shrugged. Couldn't sleep in our bed without you, he admitted. It felt wrong. Diane's heart squeezed, but she kept her voice steady. Tell me what you've been thinking this week. Really thinking, not just what you think I want to hear. Trevor was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped between his knees. I've been thinking about my father. This surprised Diane. Trevor's father had died when Trevor was 12, and he rarely talked about him. What about him? He worked construction. Hard, physical labor that broke his body down. He was proud of it though, proud that he could provide for us. He used to tell me that a man's worth is measured by his ability to take care of his family. Trevor's voice was thick with emotion. I've been carrying that my whole life, Diane. This idea that if I'm not the provider, if I'm not bringing home the bigger paycheck, then I'm failing as a husband. But that's not. I know it's not true. Intellectually, I know it. But knowing and feeling are different things. Trevor finally looked at her. When Richard said those things about you, about women who don't let their men be men, part of me felt validated. Like he was confirming something I'd been worried about, that if people knew you were successful, they'd think less of me. Diane felt tears building but held them back. So you let him humiliate me to protect your ego? Yes. Trevor's voice broke. And I hate myself for it. I've been replaying that night over and over, thinking about what I should have said, what I should have done. I should have told him to shut his mouth. I should have left with you. I should have defended my wife, regardless of what anyone thought about me. Why didn't you? Because I was scared. Scared of looking weak. Scared of causing a scene. Scared that if I stood up to my boss, I'd lose everything I'd worked for. Trevor wiped his eyes. But I lost something more important that night. I lost your trust. I lost your respect. Maybe I lost you. Diane was crying now too. You hurt me, Trevor. You hurt me so badly. I stood there watching the man I loved choose his career over me, and it broke something inside. I know. God, Diane, I know. Trevor moved slightly closer, though still maintaining distance. And then I made it worse by suggesting you don't work as hard as I do, that you've had it easy. I was lashing out because my whole identity was crumbling. The provider, the successful employee, the man who had his life together, none of it was real. You were the one holding everything up and I couldn't handle it. Do you resent me? Diane asked. For being more successful? For owning the company? For having more power? Trevor was quiet for so long that Diane thought he might not answer. Finally he said, part of me does. The part that was raised to believe men should be in charge. The part that's been conditioned by society and my father's memory and my own insecurities. That part resents you for being brilliant and powerful and successful. The words stung, but Diane appreciated the honesty. But there's another part, Trevor continued, a bigger part that's in awe of you, that's proud of you, that loves you so much it physically hurts. That part has been watching you this week, seeing you take control and fire Richard and reclaim your company, and all I can think is, that's my wife. That incredible, fearless, brilliant woman chose me. I did choose you, Diane said softly. I've been choosing you for 10 years. But I can't keep choosing you if you can't handle who I really am. I want to handle it. I want to be the partner you deserve. Trevor moved closer, his eyes pleading. But I need help. I've been looking into therapists, someone who specializes in this kind of thing. Ego issues, masculinity, marriage counseling. I made some calls. I found someone good, someone who comes recommended. Will you come with me? Diane looked at her husband, at the man she'd fallen in love with a decade ago. He was flawed and imperfect and had made terrible mistakes. But he was also sitting here, being honest about his worst impulses, asking for help. I'll go to therapy with you, she said finally. But Trevor, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to apologize for my success. I'm not going to hide or diminish myself to make you comfortable. I own a company. I'm good at what I do. And if we're going to make this marriage work, you need to celebrate that, not resent it. I want to celebrate it. Trevor reached for her hand tentatively. I want to be the husband who brags about his brilliant wife, not the husband who's threatened by her. I want to be your partner, your equal, even if our bank accounts aren't equal. Diane let him take her hand. It felt familiar and foreign at the same time. What does equal mean to you now? After everything? Trevor thought about this. It means respecting each other's contributions. It means making decisions together. It means having each other's backs, especially in public, even when it's uncomfortable. He squeezed her hand. It means I never ever stand silent again while someone disrespects you. That's what I need, Diane said. I need to know that you're on my side. Not just in private but always. I need to know that my success doesn't threaten you so much that you'll sacrifice my dignity to protect your ego. You have my word. Trevor's voice was firm. And I know words aren't enough after what I did. So I'm going to spend however long it takes proving to you that I mean it. I'm going to go to therapy. I'm going to work on my issues. I'm going to be the husband you deserve. And if you can't, if this is too hard, then I'll love you enough to let you go. Trevor's eyes filled with tears. But I really don't want to let you go, Diane. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. I was just too insecure to see it clearly. Diane pulled her hand back and stood, walking to the window. The city lights twinkled below, just like they had the night of the party. Everything had changed in a week, and yet some things remained the same. She still loved Trevor. She still wanted their marriage to work. But she also needed it to work in a way that honored who she really was. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared that therapy won't be enough. I'm scared that you'll try for a while and then fall back into old patterns. I'm scared that I'll spend my whole life managing your ego instead of living my truth. That's fair, Trevor said. I'm scared too. I'm scared you'll never trust me again. I'm scared I've broken us beyond repair. I'm scared that I'm not strong enough to be the man you need. Diane turned to face him. Then we're both scared. But maybe that's okay. Maybe fear means we care enough to try. Does that mean you're willing to try? Trevor stood slowly. To work on this? To see if we can fix what I broke. Diane looked at her husband, really looked at him. She saw his flaws and his potential. She saw the hurt he'd caused and the change he was promising. She saw 8 years of marriage and 10 years of love. And she saw a choice. She could walk away, protect herself, build a life where her success was never questioned or resented. That would be easier in some ways. Or she could take the risk, do the work, and see if they could build something stronger than before. Something based on truth instead of comfortable lies. I'm willing to try, she said finally. But Trevor, this is your one chance. If you stand silent again, if you let someone disrespect me again, if you choose your ego over our partnership again, I'm done. No second chances. No explanations. Done. I understand. Trevor crossed the room and stopped just in front of her, not touching but close. I won't let you down again. I promise you that. Don't promise me. Show me. Diane reached up and touched his face gently. Show me every day that you can handle being married to a woman who's more successful than you. Show me you can celebrate my wins instead of feeling threatened. Show me you're proud to be my husband, not ashamed. I am proud, Trevor said fiercely. I'm so damn proud of you, Diane. What you've built, what you've accomplished, it's incredible. And I'm sorry I was too insecure to tell you that before now. Diane felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of tension she'd been carrying all week. This wasn't fixed. They weren't magically okay. But it was a start. Come here, she said softly, and Trevor folded her into his arms. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in their living room, two people who'd almost lost everything trying to find their way back. Diane cried into Trevor's shoulder, and he cried into her hair, and they mourned the innocence they'd lost and hoped for the strength they'd gain. I love you, Trevor whispered. I never stopped loving you. I love you too, Diane whispered back. But love isn't enough, Trevor. We need respect too. We need partnership. We need truth. Then that's what we'll build. Trevor pulled back to look at her. Starting right now. No more secrets, no more hiding. You're Diane Patterson, owner of Patterson Enterprises, and I'm Trevor Patterson, lucky enough to be your husband. Diane smiled through her tears. That's a good start. They spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking about everything that had happened. About Richard's firing and the board meeting and Trevor's insecurities and Diane's hurt. About their future and their fears and their hopes for what they could become together. It wasn't easy. There were moments of anger and defensiveness, moments where old patterns tried to reassert themselves. But they kept pushing through, kept being honest, kept trying. By the time they finally went to bed, together in their own bedroom, Diane felt cautiously hopeful. They weren't fixed. They had months of therapy ahead of them, months of rebuilding trust and changing patterns. But they were committed to trying. As she drifted off to sleep in Trevor's arms, Diane thought about Richard Chambers's ugly prediction. You're going to regret this. but she didn't regret a thing. Not revealing her ownership, not firing Richard, not demanding that Trevor do better. She regretted only that she'd waited so long to stop hiding. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. Diane woke early, dressed in her best power suit, deep emerald green with her grandmother's pearls, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror giving herself a pep talk. "You've got this," she told her reflection. "You've faced down Richard Chambers. You fought for your marriage. You can definitely handle introducing yourself to your own employees." Trevor appeared behind her, already dressed for work. "You look beautiful. And terrifying." "Beautifully terrifying?" Diane smiled despite her nerves. "Is that a compliment?" "The highest kind." Trevor kissed her cheek carefully, mindful of her makeup. "I'm proud of you, by the way. I know I should have said it sooner, but I'm proud of everything you've built. And I'm proud to work for you, even if that sounds weird." "It sounds weird," Diane confirmed. "But I'll take it." They drove to Patterson Enterprises together for the first time ever. In the parking garage, Trevor squeezed her hand before they got out. "You ready for this?" he asked. "No. But I'm doing it anyway." The executive floor was buzzing when they arrived. News of Richard's firing had spread quickly, and employees were clustering in groups, whispering theories. Beverly met Diane at the elevator with coffee and a knowing smile. "They're all in the main conference room," Beverly said. "Christine sent out an all-staff notice for a 9 a.m. meeting. The speculation is wild. Some people think we're being acquired, some think there's been financial trouble. Nobody has guessed the truth." "Perfect." Diane sipped the coffee and felt her nerves settle slightly. "Is my mother here?" "Front row center, wearing her Sunday best." Beverly grinned. "She told me to tell you she's proud of you, and also that you better not cry and ruin your makeup." "That sounds like Mama." At precisely 9 a.m., Diane walked into the main conference room. It was packed with employees, some standing against the walls, others sitting in folding chairs that had been brought in to handle the crowd. She saw Trevor slip in near the back, saw Paul Green give him a supportive nod. She saw Janet sitting in the front row just as Beverly had promised, looking regal and proud. She saw LaToya Monroe, the junior analyst, looking nervous and curious. She saw Christine Okafor near the door with her tablet, ready to document everything. And she saw about 500 faces turned toward her with expressions ranging from confusion to curiosity to outright shock. Beverly stepped to the front of the room and called for attention. "Thank you all for coming. I know there's been a lot of speculation about recent events, and we wanted to address that directly. I'd like to introduce you to Diane Patterson." She stepped aside, and Diane moved to the center of the room. For a moment, she stood there, taking it all in. The company she'd built, the people she employed, the legacy she was claiming. Then she began to speak. "Good morning. Most of you know me as Trevor Patterson's wife. You've seen me at holiday parties and company picnics. You've probably never given me much thought beyond that, and that was intentional." Diane's voice was clear and steady. "But that changes today. My name is Diane Patterson, and I am the founder, owner, and principal shareholder of this company." The room erupted in whispers. Diane waited for them to quiet before continuing. 15 years ago, I started Patterson Enterprises with a small inheritance and a big dream. I built it slowly and carefully, making decisions that prioritized sustainability and employee welfare over quick profits. I hired each of you, either directly or through managers I trusted, because I believed in your potential. And I've been guiding this company every day since, even though most of you didn't know I existed. She saw Trevor watching her from the back, pride and pain mingled on his face. "You're probably wondering why I stayed anonymous. There are several reasons. First, I valued my privacy and wanted to make business decisions without the scrutiny that often comes with public ownership. Second, I wanted my management team to lead without my presence overshadowing them. And third," she paused, "I'm a black woman in a male-dominated industry. I knew that my identity might cause some people to question my competence, my authority, my right to lead. I decided to let my results speak for themselves before revealing who I was." LaToya Monroe raised her hand tentatively. "Miss Patterson, what changed? Why are you telling us now?" "Great question." Diane smiled at the young woman. "Last Friday at our holiday party, something happened that made me realize I was done hiding. Someone made assumptions about me based on my gender and my relationship status. Someone dismissed me as insignificant. Someone created a hostile environment that I realized had been building for months. And I decided it was time to take back control of my company publicly." She didn't name Richard, but she didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew exactly who she was talking about. Richard Chambers was terminated last Friday for cause, due to documented misconduct, financial improprieties, and the creation of a hostile work environment. If any of you filed complaints about his behavior that were buried or ignored, I apologize. That should never have happened, and it won't happen again. A ripple went through the crowd. Several employees nodded, looking vindicated. Going forward, there will be changes. I'm promoting Beverly Harris to CEO and Christine Okafor to COO. They've been running things behind the scenes anyway, now they'll have the titles and authority they deserve. We're conducting a full culture audit to identify and address any other issues. And we're implementing new policies to ensure that everyone here, regardless of gender, race, or position, is treated with dignity and respect. Paul Green raised his hand. What about the rest of us? Our jobs. Your jobs are safe, Diane assured him. In fact, we're expanding. Richard's mismanagement has been holding us back. Now that we have proper leadership, we're going to grow strategically and responsibly. That means promotions, new positions, and better opportunities for everyone. She saw relief wash over the room. I know this is a lot to process. You came to work today expecting business as usual, and instead you found out your boss's wife actually owns the company. Take your time with it. Talk to your managers. Come to HR with questions. Beverly and Christine and I are committed to transparency and open communication going forward. Janet stood suddenly, drawing everyone's attention. I'm Diane's mother, Janet Reed. I taught high school for 35 years, and I taught my daughter to work hard, stand tall, and never let anyone diminish her. I'm proud of what she's built here, and I hope all of you are too. You're working for someone who sees your value, who fights for your well-being, and who built this company from nothing through sheer determination. That's something worth celebrating. Scattered applause started, then grew until the entire room was clapping. Diane felt tears threaten but blinked them back, remembering her mother's warning about her makeup. Thank you, she said when the applause died down. Now, I know some of you have questions about me personally. Yes, I'm married to Trevor Patterson in accounting. Yes, he just found out last week that I own the company. No, he didn't get his job because of our relationship. He's here because he's damn good at what he does. And yes, there's a certain irony in the fact that I've been his boss's boss's boss this entire time without him knowing. Laughter rippled through the room. Trevor caught her eye and smiled, shaking his head ruefully. Any other questions? Diane asked. A man in the back raised his hand. What should we call you? Miss Patterson? Boss? Owner? Diane is fine, she said. I'm not interested in hierarchy for its own sake. I'm interested in building a company where people do good work, are treated fairly, and go home at night feeling valued. Call me Diane and let's build something great together. More applause, warmer this time. Diane felt something shift in the room, acceptance maybe, or at least the beginning of it. All right, everyone back to work. And someone please tell the rumor mill that we're not being acquired or going bankrupt. We're doing great and we're about to do even better. As people filed out, several employees stopped to shake Diane's hand or offer congratulations. LaToya Monroe approached shyly. Miss Patterson, Diane, I just wanted to say thank you. I filed one of those complaints about Mr. Chambers 6 months ago, and nothing happened. I was starting to think about leaving because the environment was so toxic. But now, she smiled, now I feel like maybe things can actually change. They will change, Diane promised. And LaToya, I want you to set up a meeting with me and Christine next week. I'm starting a mentorship program for junior analysts, and I'd like you to be part of the first cohort. LaToya's eyes went wide. Really? Me? Really you? You have talent and potential, and you deserve to develop it in an environment that supports you. Diane squeezed her shoulder. Don't doubt yourself. I certainly don't doubt you. After LaToya left, practically glowing, Trevor approached with Paul. Both men looked somewhat dazed. That was incredible, Paul said. I still can't believe you own the whole company, but it was incredible watching you tell everyone. Thanks, Paul. Diane smiled. And thanks for being a good friend to Trevor. He needed that this week. Of course. Although, Paul grinned at Trevor, I'm definitely going to give you endless grief about being married to the big boss. You know that, right? I'm prepared for it, Trevor said dryly. I deserve it. Yes, you do. But Paul's expression softened. Seriously though, man, you're lucky. She's amazing. I know. Trevor looked at Diane. Trust me, I know. After Paul left, Trevor and Diane stood together in the emptying conference room. Janet approached with Beverly, both women looking satisfied. Well done, baby girl, Janet said. Your grandmother would be so proud. I hope so. Diane hugged her mother. Thank you for being here. Where else would I be? Janet pulled back and studied her daughter's face. You doing okay? I'm exhausted, Diane admitted. But yeah, I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. Good. Because I'm taking you and Beverly to lunch to celebrate. Janet linked arms with both women. Trevor, you're coming too. We're celebrating your wife properly. I'd be honored, Trevor said. As they walked out together, Diane, Trevor, Janet, and Beverly, Diane felt lighter than she had in years. She'd revealed herself. She'd claimed her power. She'd started the hard work of rebuilding her marriage and reforming her company. And most importantly, she'd stopped apologizing for being brilliant. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt, more work to do. But for the first time in a long time, Diane felt like she was exactly where she belonged, at the helm of her own life, surrounded by people who saw her true value. Richard Chambers had thought humiliating her would make him look stronger. Instead, he'd awakened a force he couldn't control and lost everything. Diane Patterson had taken back her company, her dignity, and her truth, and she was just getting started. 3 weeks after the announcement, Diane sat in her newly public office reviewing quarterly reports when Christine knocked on her door with an uneasy expression. We have a situation, Christine said. Richard Chambers is in the lobby. He's demanding to speak with you. Diane's stomach tightened, but her voice remained calm. What does he want? He wouldn't say. Security asked him to leave, but he's insisting he has a right to talk to you. He's not being aggressive, but he's not leaving either. Diane thought for a moment. She could have security escort Richard out. She could ignore him completely. But part of her was curious about what he wanted to say. And part of her knew that avoiding him would give him power she no longer wanted him to have. It's okay, she told Christine. I'll see him. But stay close and make sure security is aware. If things get uncomfortable, I want him removed immediately. Are you sure about this? No. But I'm doing it anyway. 10 minutes later, Richard Chambers was shown into Diane's office. He looked different than he had at the board meeting, smaller somehow, deflated. He wore casual clothes instead of his usual expensive suits, and the arrogance that had once defined him seemed muted. Thank you for seeing me, he said quietly. Diane gestured to the chair across from her desk but didn't offer coffee or pleasantries. What do you want, Richard? To apologize. The word seemed to cost him something. For what I said at the holiday party. For how I treated you. He swallowed hard, for not realizing who you were. You mean you're apologizing because you found out I have power over you, not because you actually think you were wrong? Richard flinched. That's fair. But it's not entirely true. I've had a lot of time to think over the past few weeks. A lot of time to sit with what I did and why I did it. And what conclusion did you reach? That I'm a small man who tried to feel bigger by making others feel smaller. Richard's voice was steady but pained. That I bought into a lot of toxic ideas about gender and power and what it means to be successful. That I hurt people because I was insecure about my own worth. Diane studied him carefully. Did you practice this speech? About 100 times. A ghost of a smile crossed Richard's face. My therapist helped me write it. She said I needed to take accountability without making excuses. Your therapist? I started seeing someone after everything. She specializes in angry white men with entitlement issues. Richard's smile was self-deprecating. There's apparently a whole specialty field dedicated to people like me. Despite herself, Diane felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy. Richard, I appreciate that you're working on yourself. But an apology doesn't undo the harm you caused. It doesn't erase the women whose complaints you buried, or the employees you intimidated, or the hostile culture you created. I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. Richard leaned forward slightly. I'm asking for a chance to make amends in some small way. There's a women's business organization that needs speakers for their mentorship program. I thought maybe I could talk about what not to do, share my story as a cautionary tale. My therapist thinks it might help, both them and me. Diane hadn't expected this. You want to use your public humiliation as a teaching moment? I want to do something useful with it, yeah. Richard's voice was earnest. Look, I know I can't fix what I broke. But maybe I can stop other men from making the same mistakes. Maybe I can be the example of what happens when you let ego and insecurity drive your behavior. That's very self-aware of you. It's a recent development, Richard admitted. 3 weeks ago I was furious. I wanted to sue you, destroy your reputation, make you pay for humiliating me. My therapist helped me see that I'd humiliated myself long before you fired me. You just made the consequences visible. Diane was quiet for a long moment, processing this. The Richard sitting in front of her seemed genuinely remorseful, genuinely changed. But she also knew that people didn't transform overnight, that real change took time and consistent effort. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Give Christine your contact information. If this women's organization wants a reference from me about your proposed speaking engagement, I'll provide an honest one, including both your misconduct and your apparent attempts at growth." "That's more than fair." Richard stood to leave, then hesitated. "Can I ask you something? How long have you known? About my behavior, the complaints, all of it?" "Beverly started flagging concerns about you about 18 months ago. But I trusted my management structure, trusted that issues were being handled appropriately. I didn't realize you were burying complaints until recently." Diane held his gaze. "That's on me. I should have been more involved, more vigilant. I failed the employees who tried to report your behavior." "That's generous of you to say, but we both know this was my failing, not yours." Richard moved toward the door, then turned back one more time. "For what it's worth, you've built something remarkable here. The company, the culture you're creating now, the way people talk about you, it's impressive. I wish I'd been smart enough to see that before I opened my mouth at that party." "So do I," Diane said. "But we don't get do-overs, Richard. We only get the chance to do better going forward." "Yeah, I'm learning that." Richard gave her a small nod. "Thank you for seeing me. And for what it's worth, I really am sorry." After he left, Diane sat in her office feeling unexpectedly emotional. She'd built up Richard Chambers in her mind as a villain, as the embodiment of everything wrong with corporate culture. And he had been those things. But he was also apparently capable of growth, of recognizing his mistakes, of trying to be better. It didn't excuse what he'd done. It didn't undo the harm. But it complicated the narrative in ways that felt both frustrating and human. Beverly appeared in her doorway moments later. "I heard Richard was here. You okay?" "Yeah." "He apologized. And you believe him?" "I believe he's trying." Diane rubbed her temples. "Whether he succeeds or falls back into old patterns, who knows? But he's at least attempting to take accountability. That's more than most men in his position do," Beverly acknowledged. She sat down in the chair Richard had vacated. "Speaking of men taking accountability, how are things with Trevor?" "Good, actually. We started couples therapy. Our therapist is excellent. She doesn't let either of us off the hook. Trevor's also doing individual work on his ego stuff." Diane smiled. "It's hard, but we're making progress. He's learning to celebrate my success instead of feeling threatened by it." "And you? How are you handling all the changes?" "Honestly, it feels amazing to be public about my role here. I didn't realize how exhausting it was to hide until I stopped doing it." Diane gestured around her office. "I can walk through my own building without pretending to be someone I'm not. I can make decisions openly. I can actually lead." "You've been leading all along," Beverly pointed out. "You're just visible now." "True. But visibility matters. It gives other women, especially black women, someone to look up to. It shows that we can own entire companies, that we can be in charge, that we don't have to shrink ourselves to make others comfortable." Beverly's eyes got misty. "Speaking of which, I have news. I got a call this morning from a major business magazine. They want to do a feature on you for their upcoming issue on women entrepreneurs. They specifically mentioned that you're one of only 3 black women in the country who own companies this size." 3? That's all? "That's all. Which is why your story matters, Diane. Why your visibility matters. There are probably thousands of women out there who could build what you've built, but they never try because they don't see examples of people who look like them succeeding." Diane felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders. "I'll do the interview. But Beverly, I want to be honest about everything. About starting from nothing, about the challenges, about hiding my ownership for years because I was afraid of judgment. About Richard and Trevor and all of it. If I'm going to be visible, I want to be real." "That's why they want to interview you," Beverly said gently. "Not because you're perfect, but because you're real." That afternoon, Diane conducted her first media interview in a conference room with a young journalist named Simone Harris, a black woman in her 30s with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. Simone asked thoughtful questions about Diane's journey, and Diane found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. "What was the hardest part?" Simone asked. "Not the business itself, but being a black woman building an empire?" "The isolation," Diane answered honestly. "I couldn't talk about my success without people assuming I hadn't earned it. I couldn't show ambition without being called aggressive. I couldn't lead confidently without being labeled difficult. So I hid. I let other people take credit for my vision because it was easier than fighting constant battles about my legitimacy. But you're not hiding anymore. No, because hiding was killing me slowly. It was making me small. And I realized I'd rather deal with criticism and judgment while living my truth than be comfortable while denying who I am. What would you tell other black women who are thinking about starting their own companies? Diane thought about LaToya Monroe, about her mother, about Beverly, about all the women who'd supported her journey. I tell them to do it scared. To build something anyway even when the world tells them they're not supposed to. To find people who believe in them and hold on tight. And most importantly, I tell them to stop shrinking themselves. Stop dimming their light. Stop apologizing for being brilliant. The world needs what we have to offer, even if it doesn't always recognize that. By the time the interview ended, Diane felt exhausted but lighter. Simone packed up her recorder and notebooks, then paused. "Thank you for being so honest," she said. "This is going to be a powerful piece. Women need to hear your story." "I hope it helps someone," Diane said simply. After Simone left, Diane returned to her office and found a bouquet of flowers on her desk. The card read, "Proud of you. Still in awe. Forever your partner. Trevor." She smiled and pulled out her phone to text him, "Thank you for the flowers. See you at home." His response came immediately, "Can't wait. Love you." Diane set down her phone and looked out her window at the city below. Richard Chambers was working on himself. Trevor was fighting for their marriage. Beverly was thriving as CEO. The company was stronger than ever. And Diane was finally fully visible. It hadn't been easy. It had been messy and painful and complicated. But she wouldn't trade it for anything. She was done hiding. She was done apologizing. She was Diane Patterson, and the world was just going to have to deal with it. 6 months later, Diane stood in front of the mirror in her childhood bedroom, adjusting her dress for the company's 20th anniversary gala. 15 years since she'd founded Patterson Enterprises, 5 years since she'd grown it into what it was today, 6 months since she'd claimed it publicly. The emerald green gown she wore was elegant and bold, with her grandmother's pearls at her throat and her mother's strength in her spine. "You ready, baby girl?" Janet appeared in the doorway, looking stunning in deep purple. "More ready than I've ever been," Diane said honestly. The gala was being held at a downtown hotel, and when Diane and Janet arrived, the ballroom was already filled with employees, board members, clients, and community leaders. A banner stretched across one wall, "Patterson Enterprises, 15 years of excellence." Beverly rushed over immediately, looking radiant in a silver gown. "Thank goodness you're here. The photographer wants pictures, the reporter from that business magazine is looking for you, and about 15 people have asked me to introduce them to the legendary Diane Patterson." "Legendary?" Diane laughed. "It's been 6 months. 6 months since you fired Richard Chambers in the most epic fashion possible, revealed your ownership, promoted your best friend to CEO, and gave an interview about building empires while black and female? Yeah, you're legendary." Trevor appeared beside them, handsome in his tuxedo and carrying 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to Diane and kissed her cheek. "You look beautiful," he said. "You clean up pretty well yourself." Diane squeezed his hand. Their 6 months of couples therapy had been transformative. Trevor had done the hard work of examining his ego and insecurities, and Diane had learned to communicate her needs without apologizing for them. They weren't perfect, they still had difficult moments, but they were partners now in a way they'd never been before. "Trevor Patterson?" A voice interrupted, and they turned to see Paul Green approaching with a beautiful woman on his arm. "Diane, this is my girlfriend Erica. Erica, this is Trevor and his incredibly impressive wife Diane, who owns this entire company." "It's lovely to meet you," Erica said, shaking Diane's hand warmly. "Paul talks about you constantly. He says you've transformed the culture here." "Beverly and Christine deserve most of that credit," Diane deflected. "I just gave them the authority to do what they'd been wanting to do all along." "Don't let her fool you," Paul said. "She's being modest. Everyone here knows what she's done. You should see the employee satisfaction scores since she took over publicly. Through the roof." As Paul and Erica moved on to greet others, Diane spotted LaToya Monroe across the room. The young woman had flourished in the mentorship program, and she was now being considered for a promotion to senior analyst. "Excuse me for a moment," Diane told Trevor and made her way over to LaToya. "Miss Patterson." LaToya's face lit up. "I was hoping to see you. I wanted to thank you again for the mentorship program. I just found out I'm being promoted." "I heard." Congratulations, LaToya. You've earned it. I never would have had the confidence to apply if you hadn't believed in me. LaToya's eyes were shining. Seeing you lead this company, seeing a black woman own an entire enterprise, it made me believe I could be more than I thought possible. Diane felt her throat tighten with emotion. That's exactly why visibility matters. I'm proud of you, LaToya. Keep pushing, keep growing, keep taking up space. After more mingling and photographs, Beverly called everyone's attention for the formal program. David Brennan gave a speech about Patterson Enterprises' growth and success. Christine talked about the culture transformation. Then Beverly stepped to the microphone. 15 years ago, a young black woman with a dream and a small inheritance decided to build something meaningful. She wanted to create not just a profitable company, but a place where people were valued, where innovation was encouraged, and where excellence was the standard. Beverly's voice was warm with pride. She built Patterson Enterprises through intelligence, determination, and unwavering commitment to her vision. And then, because she's brilliant, she stayed in the background while her creation flourished. Laughter rippled through the crowd. But 6 months ago, circumstances forced her to step into the light. And we are all better for it. Tonight, I want to honor not just the company we've built, but the woman who built it. Please join me in recognizing the founder, owner, and beating heart of Patterson Enterprises, Diane Patterson. The applause was thunderous. Diane walked to the stage with her mother's hand on her back, Trevor's supportive smile in the crowd, and Beverly's proud expression beside her. She took the microphone and looked out at the room full of people whose lives intersected with hers. Employees she'd hired, colleagues she'd trusted, family who'd supported her, and a husband who was learning to celebrate her success. Thank you, she said simply. Thank you for being part of this journey. 15 years ago, I didn't know if Patterson Enterprises would survive its first year. I worked 18-hour days, made countless mistakes, and learned as I went. But I believed in the vision, a company that valued people as much as profits, that innovated responsibly, that created opportunity. She paused, gathering her thoughts. 6 months ago, I made a decision to stop hiding, to claim my role publicly, to be visible in my own company. That decision came at a cost. My marriage was tested, my privacy was lost, and I had to confront some uncomfortable truths about why I'd been hiding in the first place. But it was the right decision. Because young women like LaToya Monroe need to see that they can own companies, that they can be in charge, that their ambition is not something to apologize for. More applause. Diane waited for it to quiet. I want to thank some people specifically. Beverly Harris, my best friend and now CEO, who has been my partner in this from the beginning. You make me better at everything I do. Beverly wiped her eyes from the side of the stage. Christine Okafor, my COO, who protected employees when they needed it most and documented everything we needed to make real change. David Brennan, who believed in a 23-year-old with a crazy dream and never wavered in his support. Diane found her mother in the crowd. My mother, Janet Reed, who taught me to take up space, speak my truth, and never apologize for being brilliant. Mama, you're the foundation of everything I am. Finally, she looked at Trevor. And my husband, Trevor, who is learning alongside me what true partnership looks like. Who is doing the hard work of growth and change. Who celebrates my success now instead of being threatened by it. Thank you for fighting for us. Trevor's eyes were shining with tears. Building a company is hard, Diane continued. Being a black woman building a company is harder. But what I've learned over these 15 years is that we're stronger than we think we are. We're more capable than the world tells us. And we deserve to take up space without apologizing for it. She raised her champagne glass. So here's to the next 15 years. To continued growth and innovation. To treating people with dignity and respect. To building something that matters. And most importantly, to being visible, being bold, and being unapologetically ourselves. Thank you all for being part of this story. The room erupted in applause and cheers. People stood, raising their glasses, and Diane felt overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding her. As she stepped off the stage, Trevor was there immediately, pulling her into his arms. I'm so proud of you, he whispered. So incredibly proud. I know, Diane whispered back. I can feel it now. Finally. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and photographs and laughter. Diane danced with her mother, with Beverly, with Trevor. She watched her employees celebrate together, saw the joy on LaToya's face as she talked with other mentorship participants, felt the positive energy that came from people who felt valued and appreciated. Near midnight, Diane found herself alone on the hotel's terrace, looking out at the city lights. She thought about that night 6 months ago when she'd stood at her apartment window feeling broken and invisible. She thought about Richard Chambers's cruelty, about Trevor's silence, about her own decision to stop hiding. "Hey." Trevor appeared beside her with 2 glasses of champagne. "Thought you might need this." "Thank you." Diane accepted the glass and leaned into her husband's warmth. "Can you believe we're here? After everything?" "I can believe you're here. You're extraordinary, Diane. You always have been. I was just too insecure to see it clearly." Trevor wrapped his arm around her waist. "But I see it now. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that I see it." "That's all I ever needed," Diane said softly. "To be seen. To be celebrated. To be your equal instead of your accessory." "You're not my equal," Trevor said, and Diane stiffened until he continued. "You're extraordinary. You're brilliant. You're light years ahead of me in so many ways. But I'm working hard to be worthy of being your partner. And I'll keep working every day for as long as it takes." Diane turned to face him. "You know what? You're right. I am extraordinary. And I'm done pretending otherwise to make anyone comfortable." "Good." Trevor kissed her forehead. "The world needs more extraordinary black women owning companies and changing cultures and refusing to shrink. Especially this extraordinary black woman right here." Inside, the party continued. Diane could hear music and laughter, could see her mother dancing with David Brennan, Beverly and Christine deep in conversation, LaToya and the other junior employees celebrating their successes. This was her legacy. Not just the company or the money or the success, but this, a culture where people thrived, where women were celebrated, where ambition was encouraged instead of punished. Richard Chambers had tried to make her feel small. He'd failed spectacularly. Trevor had struggled to celebrate her success. He was learning. And Diane had finally stopped hiding and started living fully in her own power. "You ready to go back in?" Trevor asked. "In a minute." Diane took one last look at the city, at the empire she'd built, at the life she'd claimed. "I just want to enjoy this moment. This feeling of being exactly who I am, exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Take all the time you need," Trevor said. "I'll be right here beside you." And as Diane stood on that terrace with her husband's hand in hers and her grandmother's pearls at her throat and her mother's strength in her spine, she knew that this was just the beginning. Richard Chambers had mocked her, not knowing she owned the company. Now the whole world knew. And Diane Patterson was just getting started.